The rain came down in sheets that November evening, turning the streets of Bakersfield into rivers of cold water that reflected the neon signs of closed shops and darkened windows. Sarah Mitchell sat hunched beneath the narrow overhang of an abandoned gas station, her arms wrapped tightly around the double stroller that held her 6-month-old twins, Emma and Ethan. The plastic rain cover she had salvaged from a dumpster 3 weeks ago was torn now, water seeping through the holes and dampening the thin blankets that covered her babies. She rocked the stroller gently, back and forth, the motion automatic after months of practice. The twins slept fitfully, their small faces peaceful despite the cold, despite the hunger that Sarah knew would wake them soon. She had half a bottle of formula left, a carefully rationed from the sample she had received at the women's shelter 2 days ago. After that, there was nothing. Her last $7 had gone to diapers that morning, and her phone, long since disconnected, sat useless in her pocket. The wind shifted, driving rain beneath the overhang, and Sarah pulled the stroller closer, shielding it with her body. Her clothes, a thin jacket over a sweatshirt she had worn for 5 days straight, clung to her skin. Her dark hair, once carefully maintained, now hung in wet tangles around a face that was too thin, too pale, marked by sleepless nights and the kind of exhaustion that settled into bones. She was 27 years old. 6 months ago, she had been a receptionist at a dental office, living in a small apartment with her husband, preparing for the birth of their twins. Then the complications came during delivery, emergency C-section, twins born premature, hospital bills that insurance refused to cover fully. Her husband, Marcus, had promised to stand by her. He lasted 3 weeks before the fear and the debt and the crying babies became too much. She came home one evening to find him gone, his clothes missing, a note on the kitchen counter that said simply, "I can't do this." The eviction notice came 6 weeks later. Sarah had tried so hard. She worked until her body screamed in protest, the C-section scar still healing, pumping breast milk in bathroom stalls, bringing the twins with her to job interviews, where potential employers looked at the double stroller and said they would call, though they never did. By the time the sheriff arrived to remove her from the apartment, she had nowhere left to go. Her mother, bitter and distant, had made it clear years ago that Sarah's choices were her own problem. Her father was dead. She had no siblings, no friends with space for a woman and 2 infants. The shelter had been full. Every shelter had been full. And so she had taken to the streets, pushing the stroller through the city, stopping under bridges, in doorways, beneath overhangs like this one, keeping moving, keeping the babies dry when she could, feeding them when there was formula, changing them when there were diapers, surviving 1 hour at a time. A car splashed past, its headlights cutting through the rain, and for a moment, Sarah allowed herself to imagine warmth, a bed, walls that blocked the wind. Then the darkness returned, swallowing the fantasy whole. She whispered to the twins, though they couldn't hear her, the words automatic, a prayer or a promise, or perhaps just madness speaking through exhaustion. "We'll be okay. Mama's going to find us something. Somewhere warm, somewhere safe, I promise." The rain drummed harder against the pavement, mocking the words. Across the street, beneath the flickering street light, a figure approached. Sarah tensed, her hand moving instinctively to the pocket where she kept the small canister of pepper spray she had bought back when she still had money, back when safety was something you could purchase. But the figure passed without slowing, hood pulled low, shoulders hunched against the storm. Sarah exhaled slowly, her breath fogging in the cold air. She glanced at her watch, the one piece of jewelry she had refused to sell. It had been her grandmother's, a simple silver band with hands that still ticked steadily, marking time even when time felt meaningless. 11:47 p.m. In another hour, the gas station security light would shut off automatically, and she would have to move again, find another spot, another temporary haven. She leaned her head back against the cold concrete wall and closed her eyes for just a moment, letting the exhaustion wash over her. In that darkness, she saw flashes of the life she had lost, the apartment with its second-hand furniture, the nursery she had painted pale yellow, hope bright in every brushstroke. Marcus's face before the fear took hold, when he had still looked at her with something like love. Then the twins stirred, and the memories scattered. Emma whimpered, the soft sound cutting through the rain, and Sarah leaned forward, adjusting the blanket, tucking it more securely around her daughter's small body. "Shh, baby," she murmured. "Mama's here. Mama's always here." The words tasted like lies. She had been thinking about it for weeks now, the thought creeping in during the darkest hours when the twins cried and she had nothing to give them. The thought that maybe they would be better off without her. That maybe if she took them to a fire station, left them on the doorstep with a note, they would find families who could give them what she couldn't. Warmth, food, futures. But every time the thought formed, her hands would move to the stroller, her fingers would brush the soft fabric of the blankets, and she would remember the moment they had been placed in her arms for the first time, tiny and fragile and hers. And she would know that she couldn't, that whatever hell she walked through, she would walk through it with them, because they were hers, and she was theirs. And love, even when it came with nothing else, still counted for something. The rain began to ease, the downpour softening to a steady drizzle. Sarah stood slowly, her joints stiff from sitting, and checked the twins once more. Still sleeping. She pushed the stroller out from beneath the overhang, back into the wet night, and began walking. The wheels squeaked softly, one of them bent from too many curbs, too many rough streets. She walked without direction, letting her feet choose the path, passing darkened storefronts and chain-link fences, graffiti-covered walls, and empty parking lots. Bakersfield at midnight was a city of shadows, and Sarah had become one of them. She turned a corner and found herself on a street she didn't recognize, industrial and abandoned. The buildings here hulking shapes of brick and rust. At the far end of the block stood something different, something that made her slow, then stop. A fence. Tall, chain link, topped with coils of barbed wire. Beyond it, a structure rose against the night sky, massive and dark, its walls blank concrete, its windows covered with steel grates. Even from a distance, it radiated abandonment, the kind of place that had been forgotten by the city, left to rot beneath the rain and years. Sarah stood in the drizzle, staring at the building, and for reasons she couldn't explain, she felt something pull at her chest. Curiosity, maybe. Or desperation so complete it had become reckless. She pushed the stroller closer, stopping at the fence. A sign hung there, rusted and tilted, the words barely legible in the dim light. Riverside Correctional Facility. Condemned. No trespassing. Below it, a smaller sign, newer, announced in bold letters. Auction notice. Property sale. November 18th. Sarah's eyes moved from the sign to the building and back again. A prison. Abandoned. For sale. She pulled out her phone from habit, though it had no service, and checked the date on the lock screen. November 17th. Tomorrow. The idea was absurd. Ridiculous. She had $7. No, she had spent that on diapers. She had nothing. What could she possibly do at an auction for an abandoned prison? But the thought wouldn't leave her. It circled in her mind as she stood there in the rain, the twins sleeping behind her, the building looming ahead. Property. Walls. A roof. Shelter. What if? The two words echoed, fragile and impossible. What if she went? What if she bid? What if, somehow, the universe bent just enough to let her have something, anything, to keep her children safe? She thought of the stories her grandmother used to tell, the ones about people who had nothing and found everything. Fairy tales, she had always thought. But standing here, soaked and shivering, with 2 babies and no future, fairy tales felt like the only things left to believe in. Sarah turned away from the fence, her jaw set, a decision forming in the exhausted fog of her mind. Tomorrow she would go. She would find the auction house. She would walk in with her babies and her nothing, and she would see. Because what did she have to lose that hadn't already been taken? She pushed the stroller back down the empty street, the wheels squeaking, the rain falling softer now, and somewhere deep inside her chest, beneath the fear and the hunger and the bone-deep weariness, a tiny spark of something flickered. Not hope, exactly. Hope was too fragile. But something like defiance, the stubborn refusal to disappear quietly into the night. By the time dawn broke pale and cold over Bakersfield, Sarah had found an alcove behind a laundromat, where the dryer vents blew warm air through rusted grates. She had fed the twins the last of the formula, changed them with the last 2 diapers, and tried to make herself presentable with water from a public restroom and a comb she had kept in her pocket. Her reflection in the cracked mirror was a stranger. Dark circles beneath her eyes, hollow cheeks. But she wet her hair, combed it back, and tied it into a ponytail. She washed her face and hands. She straightened her jacket, hiding the worst of the stains. It wasn't much, but it was something. The auction house, she discovered after asking 3 different people, was located in a municipal building downtown, a squat concrete structure that smelled of old paper and stale coffee. Sarah arrived at 9:30 a.m., the time listed on the sign, pushing the stroller through glass doors that were smudged with fingerprints. Inside, a handful of people milled about, men in work boots and flannel shirts, women with clipboards and calculating eyes. Developers, Sarah guessed. Investors. People who saw abandoned buildings as opportunities, as blank checks waiting to be cashed. She felt their eyes slide over her, lingering on the stroller, on her threadbare jacket, on the obvious poverty that clung to her like a scent. She lifted her chin, and refusing to shrink, and moved toward the front desk, where a woman with gray hair and glasses sat sorting papers. "Excuse me," Sarah said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm here for the auction, the prison property." The woman looked up, her gaze sharpening as it moved from Sarah to the twins and back again. "The Riverside auction." "Yes. Do you have a bidder number?" Sarah hesitated. "How do I get one?" The woman's expression shifted, something between pity and annoyance flickering across her face. "You need to register. There's a registration fee. $50. Sarah's heart sank. $50. She had nothing. Less than nothing. She began, then stopped, her throat tightening. The woman was already looking past her, dismissing her, and Sarah felt the familiar burn of shame rise hot and bitter. But then a voice spoke from behind her, low and rough. "I'll cover her fee." Sarah turned. A man stood there, older, maybe in his 60s, wearing a denim jacket and boots, scuffed with age. His face was weathered, lined with years of sun and work, but his eyes, pale blue and sharp, held something Sarah couldn't name. Not pity. Something else. "You don't have to," Sarah started, but he waved her off. "I know I don't have to." He pulled a worn wallet from his pocket and slid 2 20s and a 10 across the counter to the woman. "Register her." The woman's mouth thinned, but she took the money, filled out a form, and handed Sarah a numbered paddle. "Bidder 47, she said flatly. Sarah stared at the paddle in her hands, then at the man. "Why?" she asked. He shrugged. "Maybe I like an underdog. Maybe I'm just old and sentimental. Don't read too much into it, kid." He tipped his head toward the auction room. "Good luck in there. You're going to need it." He walked away before Sarah could thank him, disappearing into the growing crowd. She stood for a moment, paddle in hand, feeling the weight of it, the impossibility of what she was about to do. Then Emma stirred in the stroller, and Sarah looked down at her daughter's face, small and trusting, and she pushed forward. The auction room was smaller than she expected, rows of metal folding chairs facing a raised platform, where a man in a cheap suit was setting up a microphone. Sarah found a seat in the back, parking the stroller beside her. The twins slept on, oblivious to the murmurs of conversation around them, the shuffle of feet, the rustle of papers. More people filtered in. Sarah counted maybe 30 in total. Not a large crowd, but enough. Enough to make her registration feel like a joke. The auctioneer, a balding man with a nasal voice, stepped to the microphone and tapped it twice. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us today. We have several properties up for bid, but I know most of you are here for the main event, the Riverside Correctional Facility." A murmur ran through the room. Sarah's hands tightened on the paddle. "As you're aware," the auctioneer continued, "Riverside has been closed for 15 years. The property is condemned. Significant structural damage. Asbestos. Lead paint. Mold. It will require extensive renovation to meet any safety codes. The city is selling as is. No warranties. No guarantees. Buyer assumes all responsibility for cleanup and demolition if necessary." He paused, for letting the words settle. "We'll start the bidding at $50,000. Sarah's stomach dropped. 50,000. She might as well have been bidding on the moon. A paddle rose. 50,000. 55. 60. The numbers climbed quickly, voices calling out with the ease of people who had money, who saw this as a gamble worth taking. Sarah sat frozen, the paddle heavy in her lap, watching the dream crumble before it had even begun. 80,000. A woman in a blazer, voice crisp. 85. A man near the front, arms crossed. 90. The auctioneer's voice droned on, the bids rising, and Sarah felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. Stupid. She had been stupid to come here, to think that something might change, might bend in her favor. The world didn't work that way. The world was merciless, and it rewarded people with money, with power, with anything except desperation and babies in a stroller. 100,000, the woman in the blazer again, confident. Silence. The auctioneer scanned the room. 100,000, going once. Sarah's hands moved without conscious thought, lifting the paddle. "Bidder 47, the auctioneer said, surprise flickering across his face. "Do you wish to bid?" Every head in the room turned. Sarah felt their eyes on her, felt the weight of their judgment, their confusion. She opened her mouth, but her voice caught. "Miss?" the auctioneer prompted. "1." She swallowed. $1. The room erupted in laughter. Not cruel laughter, exactly, but the kind that came from disbelief, from the absurdity of what she had just said. The auctioneer's expression shifted between amusement and irritation. "Miss, the current bid is $100,000. You need to bid higher than that." Sarah's face burned. "I know. I thought, this isn't a charity," the woman in the blazer said, her voice sharp. "If you can't afford to bid, don't waste our time." The auctioneer raised his hand. "Please, let's maintain decorum." He turned back to Sarah, his tone gentler now, almost pitying. "Miss, I'm afraid you'll need to wait." The older man who had paid Sarah's registration fee stood, his voice cutting through the noise. "Let her bid." The room fell silent. "John," the auctioneer said, recognition in his voice. "What are you talking about?" The man, John, moved to the front of the room, his boots heavy on the floor. "I'm talking about the rules, Henry. She's registered. She's got a paddle. She can bid whatever she wants. But $1 is a bid, isn't it?" John's pale blue eyes were hard now. "Or are we changing the rules because you don't like who's bidding?" The auctioneer's jaw worked. "Fine. Bidder 47 bids $1. But the current standing bid is 100,000, unless someone wants to go higher." "I withdraw my bid," John said. A murmur ran through the crowd. The woman in the blazer stood. "You can't just." "I can, and I did." John looked around the room. "Anyone else want to bid against a homeless woman with 2 babies? The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. One by one, the others lowered their paddles, shaking their heads, muttering under their breath. The woman in the blazer grabbed her purse and stalked out, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. The auctioneer stared at John, then at Sarah, then at the empty room. "This is highly irregular." "So is a lot of things." John turned to Sarah. "Go on, kid. Make your bid." Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. Her mouth was dry. She looked at the auctioneer, at the man named John, at the few remaining people who watched with expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt. She lifted her paddle. $1. The auctioneer closed his eyes briefly, then sighed. $1. Going once. Going twice. He paused, as if giving the universe one last chance to intervene. "Sold to bidder 47 for $1. The gavel came down. Sarah sat in stunned silence, the sound echoing in her ears. Around her, people stood, gathering their things, casting glances in her direction. She heard mutters as they passed. "Some waste of city resources. She'll never be able to do anything with it. Probably full of rats and dead bodies." But Sarah didn't care. She was shaking, her hands gripping the paddle so hard her knuckles were white. She had just bought a building, a prison, for $1. John approached her as the crowd thinned, his expression unreadable. "You just bought yourself a nightmare, kid." "I know," Sarah whispered. "Condemned property, asbestos, mold, probably $1 million in repairs before it's even habitable." "I know." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "But it's yours. And that's more than you had an hour ago." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. "If you need advice, call me. I used to work in construction. I might be able to point you in the right direction." Sarah took the card with trembling hands. "Why are you helping me?" John's expression softened, just slightly. "Because someone helped me once, when I had nothing. And I'm still here." He turned to leave, then paused. "Don't let them tell you it's impossible. People love to tell you that. But impossible just means nobody's done it yet." He walked out, leaving Sarah alone in the auction room with the twins and a building she couldn't afford to fix and had no idea what to do with. She sat for a long time after everyone left, staring at the empty platform, at the gavel resting on the podium. Then she looked down at Emma and Ethan, both awake now, their dark eyes watching her with the perfect trust that only infants possess. "We have a home," she told them, her voice breaking. "And it's a terrible, broken, impossible home. But it's ours." She stood, gathered the paperwork the auctioneer had shoved at her, and pushed the stroller toward the door. Outside, the November sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days, pale but present, and Sarah turned her face toward it, letting the weak warmth touch her skin. She had no money, no plan, no idea how to turn a condemned prison into anything livable. But she had walls, she had a roof, she had something that was hers. It was a beginning. The next morning arrived cold and bright, the kind of day that made the world look deceptively hopeful. Sarah woke beneath the bridge where she had spent the night, her body aching, the twins fussy from hunger. She had exactly $1.63 left, a bottle cap, and a building that might as well have been on the moon for all the good it did her. But the keys were in her pocket, heavy brass keys that the auctioneer had handed her with a look that said he expected never to see her again. Keys to the Riverside Correctional Facility. Keys to what the paperwork called approximately 87,000 square feet of condemned structure on 4.2 acres of city property. She fed the twins the last of a formula sample she had begged from a pharmacy, changed them using paper towels from a gas station bathroom, and began the long walk back to the prison. It took 2 hours, pushing the stroller through streets that grew increasingly industrial, past warehouses with broken windows and lots full of rusted machinery. By the time she reached the chain-link fence, her arms were shaking from exhaustion and her throat was dry with thirst she couldn't quench. The fence had a gate, secured with a thick chain and padlock. One of her keys fit. The lock opened with a grinding protest, and she pushed through, the gate screeching on hinges that hadn't moved in years. Up close, the prison was even more imposing. 4 stories of concrete and steel, its walls stained with rust and water damage, its windows dark behind their grates. The main entrance was a set of metal doors, dented and scarred, flanked by concrete pillars that might have been grand once, but now looked merely brutal. Sarah approached slowly, the stroller wheels catching on cracks in the asphalt. She tried not to think about what might be inside. Rats, certainly. Maybe worse. The building had been closed for 15 years. Anything could have taken up residence in that time. She reached the doors and fitted another key into the lock. It turned with difficulty, the mechanism stiff, but it turned. She pushed, and the door groaned open, swinging inward on protesting hinges. The smell hit her first. Mold, decay, something sharp and chemical that made her eyes water. She pulled her jacket up over her nose and mouth, then carefully maneuvered the stroller over the threshold. Inside was darkness. The windows, covered with grates and years of grime, allowed only thin shafts of light to penetrate. Sarah's eyes adjusted slowly, revealing a large entrance hall. The floor was cracked linoleum, buckled in places. The walls were painted institutional green, peeling now, revealing layers of older paint beneath. A reception desk sat in one corner, its surface thick with dust. To her left, a hallway stretched into shadow. To her right, a staircase, its metal railing rusted. Straight ahead, she could make out what looked like a large common area, tables and chairs overturned, trash scattered across the floor. Sarah stood in the entrance, the weight of what she had done settling over her like a physical thing. This wasn't a home. This was a tomb, a place where hope came to die. Emma whimpered from the stroller, and Sarah looked down, seeing her daughter's face crumple with the beginning of tears. Hunger, discomfort, fear, maybe, of the dark and the smell and the cold. "I know," Sarah whispered. "I know, baby. Mama's going to fix this. I promise. I need to figure out how." She pushed the stroller deeper into the building, moving toward the common area, where glass crunched under her feet. She saw graffiti on the walls now, crude drawings, and words she didn't want the twins exposed to. In one corner, evidence of a fire, the wall blackened, the floor covered with charred debris. This was a mistake, a terrible, desperate mistake, but she had nowhere else to go. Sarah found a section of the common area where the floor looked relatively clean, where the smell was slightly less overwhelming. She set the brake on the stroller and began clearing space with her hands, pushing aside trash, wiping dust from a table with her sleeve. She worked mechanically, her mind elsewhere, running through impossible calculations. She needed money. Not a little money. A fortune. To clean this place, to make it safe, to fix the windows and the plumbing and whatever else was broken. She needed permits, inspections, materials, labor. She needed a miracle. By midday, she had cleared a small area and found a bathroom that, miraculously, still had running water. It came out brown at first, then cleared to something approaching transparency. She filled an old bottle she found, sniffed it cautiously, then drank. It tasted metallic, but it was water. She washed the twins as best she could, using paper towels from the stroller's basket and the questionable water. They fussed, cold and hungry, and Sarah's chest ached with the knowledge that she had nothing to give them. No formula, no diapers, nothing. "I'm sorry," she whispered, holding them close. "I'm so sorry, babies. Mama's trying. I promise I'm trying." As the afternoon wore on, she explored more of the ground floor. Most of it was in similar condition. Decay, vandalism, abandonment. But in one section, she found something different. A heavy metal door marked, "Staff only, authorized personnel." It was locked, but one of her keys fit. Behind the door was a staircase leading down. Sarah hesitated, staring into the darkness below. Basements in condemned buildings were not places she wanted to go. But something pulled at her, the same reckless desperation that had brought her to the auction. She left the twins in the stroller at the top of the stairs, where she could still see them, and descended carefully, using the flashlight function on her dead phone, which still had enough battery for light even without service. The basement was vast. Rows of storage rooms lined a long corridor, their doors hanging open or missing entirely. Sarah moved slowly, shining her light into each room. Empty shelves, broken furniture, water damage everywhere. But at the end of the corridor, she found a room that was different. The door was intact, solid metal, with another lock. She tried her keys. None fit. Sarah stood there for a long moment, staring at the locked door. It could be nothing. Probably was nothing. Just another empty storage room. But her grandmother's words echoed in her mind, the old fairy tales about hidden treasures and locked doors. She thought about the warden who had run this place before it closed, about where an administrator might keep important things. Records. Maybe valuables. The door was solid, but the frame around the lock was old, damaged by water. Sarah looked around and found a length of pipe in one of the other rooms. She wedged it into the gap by the lock and pulled with all her strength. The frame groaned. She pulled harder, her arms shaking, her breath coming in gasps. The twins were crying upstairs now, the sound echoing down the stairwell, and Sarah's chest tightened with panic. She pulled one more time, throwing her whole weight into it. The frame splintered. The door swung open. Sarah stumbled inside, her phone light sweeping across the room. It was an office, a desk, still intact, filing cabinets, and against the far wall, partially hidden behind a fallen bookshelf, something that made Sarah's breath catch. A safe. Old, heavy, built into the wall itself, the kind banks used decades ago. Sarah moved closer, her hands trembling. She brushed dust from the safe's door, revealing a combination dial and a handle. She tried the handle. Locked, of course. She stood there in the darkness of the basement, in the condemned prison she had bought for $1, and laughed. No, not happy laughter. The kind that comes when the universe reveals itself to be nothing but cruel jokes. A safe. Of course there was a safe. Locked. Useless. Mocking her with possibilities that would never open. She turned to leave, to go back to her crying babies, to face the reality of her situation. But as her light swept across the desk, something caught her eye. A small object, half buried under papers. She moved closer. A notebook. Old, leather-bound, its pages yellowed with age. She opened it carefully. Inside, in neat handwriting, were lists, inventory, records. And on one page, dated October 2009, 3 months before the prison closed, combination changed. New sequence, 34-1256. Emergency access only. All valuables secured. Sarah's hands shook as she read the numbers again. 34-1256. She looked at the safe, then back at the notebook, her heart beginning to pound. It could be nothing. The safe could be empty. Probably was empty. This was a condemned prison, not a treasure vault. But the numbers were there, written in the warden's hand, and Sarah had nothing left to lose. She moved to the safe, her phone light balanced on the desk to illuminate the dial. She spun it slowly, carefully. 34. Right. 12. Left. 56. Right. She held her breath and pulled the handle. It gave. The door swung open with a groan of protest, revealing the darkness inside. Sarah's hand trembled as she reached for her phone, shining the light into the safe's interior. At first, she saw only papers, files, folders, disappointing, useless paper. But beneath the papers, stacked neatly, were boxes. She pulled one out, her fingers fumbling with the lid. Inside were bills. Cash. Stacks and stacks of $100 bills, bound with rubber bands that had degraded with age but still held. Sarah's vision swam. She set the box down, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold it, and reached for another. More cash, and another. More. She counted 6 boxes in total. Her mind tried to calculate, but the numbers were too large, too impossible. Thousands. Tens of thousands. Maybe more. She sank to the floor, her back against the desk, staring at the boxes with tears streaming down her face. This wasn't possible. Things like this didn't happen. Not to people like her. Not to homeless women with babies, and nothing. But the money was real. She could touch it. Smell the musty scent of old paper. See the serial numbers in the dim light. Upstairs, the twins cried harder, their voices echoing down the stairwell, calling her back to reality. Sarah wiped her face, grabbed one box, and climbed the stairs on shaking legs. She reached the twins and lifted Emma from the stroller, holding her close, her tears falling onto her daughter's soft hair. "We're okay," she whispered. "Oh God, babies. We're okay. Mama found something. Mama found—" Her voice broke, and she held both twins, one in each arm, rocking them in the ruins of the prison, in the building she had bought for $1, where hidden in the darkness was more money than she had ever imagined. It wasn't over. She knew that. The money was suspicious, possibly illegal. There would be questions, investigations, claims. But for this moment, holding her babies in the filtered light of a condemned building, Sarah allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in months. Relief. Pure, an overwhelming relief. The fairy tale had been true after all. The locked door had hidden treasure. And maybe, just maybe, her babies would be warm tonight. Sarah didn't sleep that night. She couldn't. She had moved the box of cash upstairs to the common area, hidden it under debris in a corner, where she could see it from where she sat with the twins. Every few minutes, her eyes would drift to that corner, half expecting the box to vanish, to prove itself a hallucination born of exhaustion and desperation. But it remained. Real. Solid. Terrifying. She had counted the money in that first box 3 times, her fingers trembling, her mind refusing to accept the numbers. $10,000. In one box. $10,000 that had been sitting in a basement safe in an abandoned prison for 15 years. The twins slept finally, exhausted from crying, curled together in the stroller with every blanket Sarah owned wrapped around them. She watched them breathe, watched their small chests rise and fall, and felt tears slide hot down her cheeks. Tomorrow, she would have to make decisions. Tomorrow, she would have to figure out what this money was, where it came from, whether she could keep it. Tomorrow, she would have to face the reality that money hidden in a prison safe was probably not money that had been obtained legally. But tonight, she allowed herself to imagine. Formula for the twins. Diapers. A hotel room with heat and clean sheets. Food. Real food, not scraps begged from restaurant dumpsters. Medicine if the babies got sick. Clothes that fit. A future that extended beyond the next hour. When dawn came pale and cold through the grimy windows, when Sarah had made her decision, she would go back down to the safe. She would see what else was there, and then she would figure out what to do with it. She changed the twins using paper towels and the last of the water she had collected, then settled them back in the stroller with a gentleness that came from having nothing else to give them. They were hungry again, their cries weak now, and Sarah's chest ached with the knowledge that she was failing them with every moment she delayed. "Soon," she whispered. "I promise, babies. Soon." She descended the stairs to the basement, her phone light cutting through the darkness. The safe stood open still, its door hanging like a broken promise. Sarah approached it slowly, as though it might be a trap, as though this might be the moment reality reasserted itself. But the boxes were still there. She pulled them out one by one, carrying them to the warden's desk where she could examine them in better light. 6 boxes total. She opened each one with shaking hands. The first 4 boxes contained cash, stacks of $100 bills, 50s, 20s, all bound with rubber bands, all showing signs of age but still intact. Sarah counted mechanically, her mind disconnecting from the impossible numbers. Box 1, 10,000. Box 2, 15,000. Box 3, 12,000. Box 4, 8,000. $45,000. More money than Sarah had earned in the past 3 years combined. But it was the 5th box that made her breath stop entirely. Inside were not bills, but envelopes. Large manila envelopes, sealed with tape that had yellowed with age. Sarah opened the first one carefully, her hands trembling. Bonds. Government bonds. Treasury bonds. She didn't understand all the details, but the numbers printed on them were clear. $10,000. 20,000. 50,000. She counted them slowly. 12 bonds in total. Her mind tried to calculate. Bonds that had been sitting here for 15 years, gaining interest, compounding. She didn't know the exact math, but she knew enough to understand that these pieces of paper were worth far more than their face value. She set them aside with shaking hands and reached for the 6th box. This one was heavier. When she lifted the lid, she found something that made no sense at all. Gold coins, dozens of them, each about the size of a $50, each gleaming dully in her phone's light even beneath the dust. She picked one up, feeling its weight, seeing the eagle stamped on one side, on the date on the other. 1904. Sarah knew nothing about coins, but she understood gold. She understood that gold was valuable, that gold coins this old were probably worth far more than their weight. She counted them. 48 coins in total. She sat back against the desk, her mind reeling. This wasn't just money hidden in a safe. This was wealth. Real wealth. The kind that could change everything. But why was it here? Why would a prison warden have this much money hidden in a safe? Where had it come from? She thought about the prison, about what she had read in the auction paperwork. Riverside Correctional had been closed in 2009, following allegations of corruption, mismanagement, and abuse. An investigation had been launched, but before it could conclude, the facility had been shuttered, the record sealed, the staff scattered. Sarah's stomach turned. Corruption. This money, this wealth was probably stolen, taken from budgets meant for prisoner care, skimmed from contracts, embezzled from taxpayers. Blood money, in a way. Money that had been hidden when the investigation got too close, money that the warden had never been able to retrieve before he died, or fled, or faced justice. She should turn it in. She knew that. She should call the police, report the find, let them sort out where it belonged. But even as the thought formed, she looked at the boxes, at the cash and bonds and gold, and she thought of her babies upstairs, hungry and cold. She thought of the months on the street, the nights under bridges, the way people looked at her with contempt and pity. She thought of Marcus, who had promised forever and delivered 3 weeks. She thought of her mother, who had turned her away. She thought of the shelter workers who said there was no room, the employers who wouldn't hire a woman with twins, the landlord who had thrown her belongings on the street. The world had given her nothing. The world had taken everything and offered only judgment in return. Was it really stealing if no one was claiming it? If it had been hidden here for 15 years, forgotten, abandoned along with the building? Sarah's hands curled into fists. She was a good person. She had always been a good person. She paid her taxes when she had income. She returned the extra change when cashiers made mistakes. She had never stolen anything in her life. But her babies were starving, and the money was here, and no one was coming to claim it. She gathered the boxes carefully, carrying them upstairs one at a time. She hid them in different locations throughout the building, places she could remember, but that wouldn't be obvious to anyone else. The cash in one section, the bonds in another, the coins hidden beneath a loose floor tile she discovered near the old medical wing. By the time she finished, the morning had burned away into afternoon, and the twins were crying again, their hunger a knife in Sarah's chest. She took $500 from one of the cash boxes, tucked it into her jacket pocket, and left the building. The walk to the nearest grocery store took 40 minutes. Sarah bought formula, diapers, wipes, baby food, a package of bottles, and with the remaining money, a cheap prepaid phone. The cashier looked at her with thinly veiled disgust, but Sarah didn't care. She had money now. She wasn't invisible anymore. So she returned to the prison and fed the twins, watching their desperate suckling with tears streaming down her face. When they were full and changed and sleeping peacefully for the first time in days, Sarah sat with the new phone and stared at the keypad. She needed help. She needed advice. She needed someone who understood money and law and what happened when you found a fortune in an abandoned building. She thought of the man from the auction, John. He had given her his card. She pulled it from her pocket, the edges worn already from being handled too many times. John Morrison, it read. Morrison Construction and Consulting. She dialed the number, her heart pounding. He answered on the third ring. Morrison. It's Sarah, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. From the auction. You paid my registration fee. A pause. The prison girl. Yeah, I remember. You doing okay? Sarah's voice caught. I need help. I found something in the building. Something big. And I don't know what to do. Another pause. Longer this time. What kind of something? I can't explain over the phone. Would you be willing to meet me at the property? When? Now? If you're free? She heard him exhale, could almost see him weighing the request, calculating whether this was worth his time. Finally, give me an hour. I'll be there. He arrived 67 minutes later in a pickup truck that had seen better decades, pulling up to the chain-link fence with a crunch of gravel. Sarah met him at the gate, the twins in their stroller, and she saw his eyebrows rise as he took in her appearance. She had washed her face and hands, tried to smooth her hair, but she knew she still looked like what she was, a homeless woman squatting in a condemned building. "You're living here," he said, not a question. "I don't have anywhere else." He nodded slowly, then looked past her at the prison. "Jesus, you really did buy yourself a nightmare." "I know, but I found something inside, something I need you to see." She led him through the building, explaining nothing, just guiding him down the stairs to the basement, to the warden's office, to the open safe. She had left one box there, the one with the bonds, knowing she needed proof before he would believe her. John stood in the doorway, his flashlight sweeping across the room, landing on the open safe, the desk, the box. He moved closer slowly, like a man approaching something that might bite. Sarah opened the box. There are 6 boxes total, 4 with cash, this one with bonds, and 1 with gold coins. John stared at the bonds for a long moment, then reached out and picked one up, examining it carefully. His expression was unreadable. "How much?" he asked finally. "I don't know exactly. Maybe 50,000 in cash. The bonds, I'm not sure what they're worth now. The coins, I have no idea." He set the bond down carefully, then turned to look at her. "Do you know what this is?" "Stolen money. Probably." "Yeah, probably." He ran a hand through his gray hair. "Jesus Christ, kid. You found the warden's stash. What do I do?" John was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving from the box to Sarah and back again. "Legal answer? You call the police. You report it. They investigate, figure out where it came from, and if they can't trace it to specific victims, it might eventually be returned to you. Might. After years of legal wrangling. And the illegal answer?" His mouth twitched. "The illegal answer is that you're sitting on a fortune that's been forgotten for 15 years in a building nobody wanted. And if you're smart and careful, you can turn it into a future for those kids." Sarah's throat tightened. "I don't want to be a criminal." "No one ever does." John leaned against the desk, his expression serious. "But here's the thing. You bought this building legally. You found this money on your own property. There's no owner coming forward to claim it. The warden who hid it is probably dead or in prison himself. The prison system doesn't even know it exists. In a legal gray area, possession is 9/10 of the law. But the bonds," Sarah said, "they have serial numbers. They're traceable." "They are. Which is why you don't cash them all at once. You do it slowly, carefully, a few at a time, spread out over months, different banks. Small enough not to trigger reports." Sarah stared at him. "You're telling me how to launder money. I'm telling you how to survive." His voice was hard now. "I'm telling you that the system doesn't give a damn about women like you, about babies with nothing. I'm telling you that if you walk into a police station with this money, you'll get a pat on the head and watch it disappear into evidence lockers while you go back to living on the street." He pushed off the desk and moved closer to her. "But if you're smart, if you use this money carefully, you can give those kids what they need. Not just food and diapers. A real life, education, opportunity. Everything the world told you they'd never have." Sarah felt tears burn her eyes. "Why are you helping me?" John's expression softened. "Because I told you. Someone helped me once. And because I'm old, and I've seen too many people do the right thing and watch it destroy them." He glanced at the box. "You want my help? My real help?" "Yes." "Then here's what we do. First, we get this money out of here and somewhere safer. My place, temporarily. We sort through it, figure out exactly what we have. Then we make a plan. Cash gets spent slowly, carefully, on things that won't raise red flags. Bonds get cashed gradually. Coins get sold to private collectors. No questions asked. And we use it to turn this place into something. Into what? He looked around the ruined office, at the water damage and mold and decay. Into whatever you want it to be. But first, we make it livable. We fix the basics. Power, water, heat. Make one section safe enough for you and the kids. That's step one. Sarah's mind spun. That would cost. Yeah, it would cost. But you've got the money now, and I've got the skills. We do most of the work ourselves, buy materials cheap, keep it off the books. In 6 months, maybe less, you could have a real home here. And if someone asks where I got the money, you're careful. You say you got a settlement, injury from your last job, private, sealed. People don't ask too many questions about money if you're not flashing it around stupidly. Sarah looked at the box, at the bonds that represented more than money, that represented everything she had lost, and everything she might still save. She thought about the twins upstairs, about the hunger in their cries, about the cold nights and the fear and the desperate, grinding poverty that had almost killed her. She thought about the warden who had hidden this money, who had stolen it from somewhere, from someone. She thought about whether that made her a thief too, taking what had been taken. And then she thought about Emma and Ethan, about their faces when they smiled, about the trust in their eyes when they looked at her. She thought about the promise she had made to them in the rain, that she would keep them safe, that she would be enough. "Okay," she whispered. "Help me." John nodded once, his expression satisfied. "Let's move this stuff before someone else wanders in here." They worked through the afternoon, carrying the boxes up from the basement to John's truck, though he had brought canvas tarps and secured everything carefully, concealing it beneath construction equipment. No one passing on the street would see anything unusual. When the last box was loaded, John handed her another card, this one with an address. "My shop. Come by tomorrow morning, early. We'll sort through everything, figure out what you've really got." "And Sarah?" He waited until she met his eyes. "Don't tell anyone else about this. Not family, not friends, not some boyfriend who shows up promising to help. The fewer people who know, the safer you are." She nodded. She had no family to tell anyway. No friends. No boyfriend. Just her and the twins, and a man who had decided, for reasons she still didn't fully understand, to help her. After he left, Sarah stood in the prison's entrance hall, and the building feeling larger and emptier now that the money was gone. The sun was setting, painting the grimy windows orange and red, and for the first time since Marcus left, Sarah felt something other than fear. She felt possibility. That night, she cleaned a section of the old administrative wing, dragging trash out, scrubbing floors with water and old rags. She moved the stroller into a corner office that still had a door, created a nest of blankets and cardboard, made it as comfortable as she could. The twins slept peacefully, fed and changed, and Sarah lay beside them, staring at the ceiling. She thought about numbers. 50,000 in cash, maybe another 100,000 in bonds, perhaps more with interest. The gold coins could be worth anything. Altogether, she might have $200,000. Maybe more. It was a fortune. It was a life. It was everything. And it was stolen. But was it more stolen for her to use it than for it to remain hidden in a wall, forgotten and useless? Was there some cosmic justice that said suffering was more moral than survival? Sarah's grandmother had told her once that God helped those who helped themselves. Maybe this was what that meant. Not waiting for someone to save you, but taking the opportunity when it appeared, even if it came wrapped in questions and gray morality. She reached out and touched Emma's soft hair, then Ethan's, feeling their warmth, their aliveness. They were here because of her, and they would survive because of her. whatever it took, whatever the cost. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, Sarah dreamed not of rain and hunger, but of walls being painted, of windows letting in light, and of her babies laughing in rooms that were warm and safe, and theirs. The next morning, she arrived at John's shop at 7 a.m. It was a large warehouse on the industrial side of town, filled with construction equipment, lumber, and the smell of sawdust and oil. John was already there, looking like he hadn't slept much either. He led her to a back office where he had spread the contents of all 6 boxes across a large table. The cash was sorted into neat piles. The bonds were laid out in rows. The gold coins gleamed in their own section. "Counted everything," he said without preamble. "Cash total is $47,300. Bonds are another story. These are Treasury bonds, maturity dates ranging from 2015 to 2030. The ones that have already matured are worth their face value plus accrued interest. The ones still maturing are worth less now, but will be worth more later. Conservative estimate, you're looking at about $95,000 once you cash them all in." Sarah's legs felt weak. 95,000. Give or take. Could be more, could be slightly less depending on when and where you cash them. He moved to the coins. These are where it gets interesting. American gold eagles. Not from 1904, that's the design date, not the mint date. These are from the 1990s. Each one contains 1 troy ounce of gold. At current market prices, that's about $1,900 per coin. Times 48 coins, you're looking at $91,000. Maybe more if you sell to collectors instead of gold dealers. The numbers piled up in Sarah's head. Too large, too impossible. That's over $230,000. $233,000, give or take. Yeah. John's expression was serious. That's life-changing money, Sarah. That's buy a house, start a business, set your kids up for college money. But only if you don't screw it up. Sarah sank into a chair, her hands shaking. $233,000. She had been homeless 3 days ago. She had been sleeping under bridges with infant twins. And now she had nearly $250,000. "I need a lawyer," she said suddenly. "Don't I? I need to make sure this is legal, or at least that I'm protected." John considered that. Normally, yes. But lawyers ask questions. They file paperwork. They create records. You want my advice? Don't lawyer up unless you absolutely have to. For now, we keep this quiet. We use the money carefully, and we build you a life. If problems come later, we deal with them then. But if you bring lawyers in now, you're just inviting scrutiny you don't need. What if the FBI comes? What if there's some database that tracks stolen money? Cash isn't tracked. Not like this. Not individual bills from 15 years ago. The bonds are registered, sure, but if you cash them slowly at different banks, there's no red flags. And the gold? Gold is sold every day. No one's tracking individual coins unless they're rare collectibles, which these aren't. Sarah's mind raced. How do I cash the bonds without ID? I have an ID, but I don't have a bank account. I don't have credit. I'm invisible. I know. John pulled a folder from his desk. First step, we fix that. We get you set up properly. Driver's license current? Birth certificates for the kids? Social security cards? Yes. I kept all that. It's in the stroller. Good. Then tomorrow, you open a bank account. Small bank, local, not one of the big chains. You go in, you tell them you're setting up after a divorce, starting fresh. You deposit $500 cash. That's it. Just enough to open the account and show you're serious. $500? Small amounts, nothing that triggers reporting requirements. Banks have to report deposits over $10,000. They get suspicious of anything that looks like you're structuring to avoid reports. So you stay well below that. 500 now, maybe 1,000 next month. You build a normal banking relationship slowly. Sarah nodded, trying to absorb everything. Meanwhile, John continued, I start buying materials. I pay cash, tell my suppliers I've got a private client who wants to stay off the books for tax reasons. They don't care as long as they get paid. I buy what we need to fix up one section of that prison. Insulation, drywall, plumbing supplies, wiring. We do the work ourselves. No permits, no inspections. Not yet. Later, once you're established, once the money's been integrated, and you look legitimate, then we go legal. But for now, we stay under the radar. How long will that take? 6 months, maybe, to get one section livable. After that, we reassess. Maybe you turn the rest of the place into something that makes money. Storage units, artists' studios, small business rentals. This place is huge. You could subdivide it 100 ways. Sarah looked at the money spread across the table, at the tangible proof that her life had changed. Why are you doing this? Really? You said someone helped you once, but this is more than helping. John was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his wallet and pulled out a photograph, worn and faded. He handed it to Sarah. It showed a younger John, maybe 40, standing next to a woman and a teenage girl. They were smiling, standing in front of a house, a sold sign visible in the yard. My wife and daughter, he said. 20 years ago. I just bought that house. First place I ever owned. I was so proud. His voice roughened. Fire took it 8 months later. Faulty wiring I'd installed myself, trying to save money. They both died in their sleep. Smoke inhalation. Sarah's throat closed. John, I'm so... He held up a hand. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you so you understand. After they died, I had nothing. No house, no family. I had insurance money, but I couldn't spend it. Every time I looked at it, I saw their faces. I ended up on the street for 2 years, drinking, trying to die slowly. He took the photo back, tucked it carefully into his wallet. Someone pulled me out. Contractor named Bill Haynes. He found me passed out behind his shop one morning, and instead of calling the cops, he gave me a job. Let me sleep in his warehouse, taught me the business, saved my life for no other reason than he thought I deserved saving. What happened to him? Dead now. Heart attack 5 years back. But before he died, he told me something. He said, the only way to repay what I gave you is to give it to someone else. So that's what I'm doing. You remind me of me, Sarah. You're at the bottom, looking up, for trying to figure out how to survive. And you've got 2 reasons to live sleeping in that stroller. So yeah, I'm helping you. Because someone helped me. And because those babies deserve better than the street. Tears slid down Sarah's face. She wiped them away roughly, nodding. Thank you. I'll pay you back. However long it takes, don't want your money. Want you to succeed. Want to see those kids grow up safe. That's payment enough. He stood, all business again. Now, let's get to work. First thing, we move the cash somewhere secure. I've got a safe here you can use until you figure out something better. Then we start making plans for that prison. You ready? Sarah looked at the money, at the impossible wealth that had fallen into her lap, at the man who had decided to help her, for reasons that made sense only in the strange mathematics of grief and redemption. I'm ready, she said. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she meant it. The first month passed in a blur of work that left Sarah's body aching, but her spirit stronger than it had been in years. John arrived at the prison every morning at 6 a.m., his truck loaded with materials purchased from suppliers who asked no questions and kept no records. Together, they began the slow, painstaking work of transforming one section of the condemned building into something livable. They started with the administrative wing on the second floor, choosing it because it was structurally sound and far enough from the street that no one passing by would notice the work. John taught Sarah how to strip damaged drywall, how to check for mold, how to seal leaks and reinforce walls. Her hands, soft from months of having nothing to do but push a stroller, developed calluses and cuts. Her arms burned from carrying materials upstairs. But every night, when she collapsed beside the twins in their makeshift nest, she felt something she hadn't felt since before Marcus left. Purpose. The babies thrived. With formula and diapers readily available, with warmth from the space heaters John brought, Emma and Ethan began to fill out, their cheeks growing round, their smiles coming more easily. Sarah set up a safe play area in the corner of the workspace, surrounding it with plastic sheeting to keep out dust, and the twins would lie on blankets, watching their mother work, on occasionally babbling sounds that felt like encouragement. By the end of the first month, they had one room completely finished. Walls painted a soft cream color, the floor covered with laminate that John got from a supplier's overstock, electrical wiring run properly and safely. A small bathroom had been renovated next door, the plumbing connected to the building's main lines, which, miraculously, still functioned. Hot water flowed for the first time in 15 years, and Sarah cried the first time she stood under the shower, feeling clean water wash away, not just dirt, but months of accumulated despair. She opened the bank account as John instructed, depositing $500 at a small community bank where the teller smiled at her twins and asked no uncomfortable questions. The account felt like proof of existence, like she had rejoined the world of legitimate people who had addresses and plans and futures. She cashed her first bond at a different bank 3 weeks later, a $10,000 treasury bond that had matured 2 years ago. The teller processed it without comment, and Sarah walked out with a check that she deposited in 3 different installments, spread over 2 weeks. No red flags, no questions, just money becoming real, becoming usable, becoming the foundation of a life. But word was beginning to spread. Construction work, even quiet construction work, generates noise. Trucks coming and going, the sound of hammering, the smell of fresh paint. Neighbors in the industrial area began to notice. A few stopped by, curious about what was happening in the old prison. John handled them smoothly, explaining he'd been hired to do some basic stabilization work. Nothing major, just keeping the place from collapsing entirely. Most accepted that and moved on. But one person didn't. Sarah was working on installing cabinet hardware in the small kitchen they'd built when she heard voices outside. Raised voices. Angry. She moved to the window and looked down to see a woman standing at the gate, arguing with John. The woman was in her 50s, heavy-set, wearing a business suit and an expression of outrage. Sarah's stomach tightened. She recognized that type of anger. It was the anger of people who believed rules existed to be enforced, especially against people like her. She went downstairs, the twins in the stroller, and stepped outside. The woman's attention immediately shifted to her, eyes narrowing. "You're the one who bought this place," the woman said. Not a question, an accusation. "I am," Sarah replied, keeping her voice steady. "For $1, at that farce of an auction." It was a legal auction, conducted by the city. The woman's face reddened. "I'm Linda Vaughn. I'm on the city council, and I'm here to inform you that this property is condemned. You cannot live here. You certainly cannot be doing unpermitted construction work." John stepped forward. "The property belongs to her. She can do what she wants with it. Not without permits. She can't. Not without inspections. Not without following the building codes that exist to keep people safe. Linda's eyes moved to the twins. Especially not with children on the premises. This is dangerous, illegal, and I intend to report it. Sarah felt ice form in her chest. This was it. The moment when everything she'd built would be torn down. She could see it in the woman's face, the satisfaction of catching someone breaking the rules, the eagerness to enforce consequences. But then John laughed. Actually laughed. Report it to who, Linda? The same city that sold her a condemned building for $1 because nobody wanted the liability. The same city that's been ignoring this place for 15 years. The building inspector will take one look at the paperwork showing she legally owns this property and tell you it's a civil matter, not a criminal one. She's not running a business. She's not creating a public hazard. She's making her own property livable. That's not illegal. She needs permits. For what? She's doing basic maintenance, fixing a roof, patching walls. That doesn't require permits unless she's changing the structure or adding square footage. And she's not. Linda's jaw worked. I'll get a court order. I'll have social services investigate whether this is a safe environment for children. And there it was, the real threat. Take the children. Sarah felt something snap inside her. She stepped forward, and when she spoke, her voice was cold in a way that surprised even her. You do that. You call social services. And while they're investigating whether my children are safe in a building with heat and food and clean water, I'll be calling every reporter in Bakersfield to ask them why the city sold me a building they knew was unfit, took my $1, and then tried to take my children when I made it livable. Linda blinked, clearly not expecting resistance. Sarah pressed on. I'll tell them how I was homeless, how I had twin babies and no shelter, how the city's shelters were full and no one helped, how I bought this building legally, with witnesses, at a public auction, and how the moment I started making something of it, the city decided I was a problem that needed to be dealt with. She took another step forward. You want to fight me? Fine. But I promise you, Councilwoman Vaughn, I have nothing left to lose. And people with nothing to lose fight harder than you can imagine. The silence stretched. Linda's face cycled through emotions, anger, uncertainty, calculation. Finally, she straightened her suit jacket. This isn't over, she said, but the conviction had leaked from her voice. Yes, it is, John said quietly, because if you come back here, if you harass this woman again, I'll be the one calling reporters, and I'll be asking them why a city councilwoman is targeting a single mother who's doing exactly what the city should have done years ago, dealing with an abandoned eyesore. Linda turned and walked to her car without another word. They watched her drive away, the sound of her engine fading into the industrial quiet. Sarah's hands were shaking. John put a hand on her shoulder. You did good, kid. Stood your ground. She'll come back, Sarah whispered. Maybe, but she'll think twice now. And in the meantime, we work faster. We get this place to a point where even if inspectors come, they can't claim it's unsafe. Because it won't be. That night, lying in the finished room with the twins sleeping peacefully in the second-hand cribs John had helped her buy, Sarah made a decision. She couldn't keep hiding. She couldn't keep pretending this was temporary. If she was going to build a life here, she needed to commit to it. Fully. The next morning, she called the city building department. She spoke to a clerk and explained she wanted to get permits for renovation work on a property she owned. The clerk seemed surprised but walked her through the process. Applications, fees, plans to be submitted, inspections to be scheduled. It would cost money. Several $1,000s just in fees and permits. But Sarah had the money now. And more than that, she had the determination to do this right. John helped her draw up basic plans, nothing elaborate, just converting portions of the prison into residential and mixed-use space. They hired a structural engineer to assess the building, on paying him in cash and swearing him to confidentiality about what else might exist on the property. He gave them a report noting that while the building was old and needed work, it was fundamentally sound. Solid concrete and steel, built to last. Armed with that report and their plans, Sarah submitted her permit applications. She opened a business checking account, depositing $15,000 and listing herself as owner of Riverside Property Management, LLC. She hired an accountant to help her set up the business properly, to make sure taxes were filed, everything legal and documented. The accountant, a middle-aged woman named Grace, who worked out of a small office and charged reasonable rates, looked over Sarah's paperwork with sharp eyes. "Where'd the startup capital come from?" she asked. Sarah had her story ready. Settlement from my previous employer. Workplace injury. The details are sealed." Grace studied her for a moment, and Sarah held her gaze, refusing to look away. Finally, the accountant nodded. "Fair enough. None of my business anyway, long as the money's reported properly." She began entering information into her computer. "You're doing this right, coming to me now. A lot of people try to wing it and end up in trouble later. This way, everything's above board from the start." Over the next 3 months, the prison transformed. John brought in 2 workers he trusted, men who had worked for him for years and knew how to keep their mouths shut. Together, they renovated 4 large rooms on the 2nd floor, creating living space for Sarah and the twins, a real bedroom for her, a nursery for Emma and Ethan, a living area with furniture Sarah bought secondhand, but which felt like luxury compared to what she'd had, a kitchen with appliances that worked. The building inspector came twice. The first time, he walked through shaking his head, muttering about the insanity of trying to make a prison livable. But he couldn't find any violations in the work they'd done. Everything was to code. Wiring was proper. Plumbing was sound. Ventilation was adequate. The second time, he came with Linda Vaughn, clearly expecting to find evidence of wrongdoing. Instead, he found a woman living with her children in a clean, safe, properly renovated space. He signed off on the permits and left, Linda trailing behind him, her face tight with frustration. Word spread further. A reporter from the local paper got wind of the story and came asking questions, and Sarah met with him, carefully, telling a version of the truth that left out the money. She was a single mother who had been homeless. She had bought the building for $1 at a legal auction. With the help of friends and a lot of hard work, she was turning it into something livable. It was a story of perseverance, of not giving up, of making something from nothing. The article ran on the front page of the local section. From homeless to homeowner, single mother transforms abandoned prison. The photo showed Sarah holding the twins in front of the building, the prison's imposing walls behind them, her expression serious but hopeful. The reaction was mixed. Some people called her inspirational. Others called her crazy, said the building should have been torn down, that she was wasting her time. But what mattered was that people knew her now. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was the woman who bought the prison, the woman who refused to give up. And then Marcus called. She almost didn't recognize his voice. It had been 8 months since he'd walked out, and in that time, she had changed so fundamentally that his voice sounded like an echo from another life. "Sarah, it's me." She stood in her kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, and said nothing. "I saw the article," he continued, "about the building, about what you're doing. I wanted to talk to you." "What do you want, Marcus?" "I want to apologize for leaving, for not being there when you needed me. I was scared, and I handled it wrong, and I'm sorry." Sarah looked around the kitchen she had built with her own hands, at the high chair where Emma sat, some smearing applesauce on her face. At the crib, visible through the doorway where Ethan napped. At the walls she had painted, the cabinets she had installed, the life she had created from ruins. "Okay," she said. "Okay? That's it? What else do you want me to say?" I thought maybe I could see the kids. Maybe we could try again. I've been thinking about us, about what we had. We had nothing, Marcus. We had a marriage that lasted 3 weeks after things got hard. You don't get to come back now because you read an article and decided I might be worth something again. That's not fair. You're right. It's not fair. It wasn't fair when you left me alone with 2 newborns. It wasn't fair when I had to sleep on the street because you took the money and ran. It wasn't fair when I had to feed my babies with formula I begged from strangers because you decided fatherhood was too difficult. Her voice was steady, cold. So no, Marcus. You don't get to see the kids. You don't get to be part of this. You made your choice. Now, live with it. She hung up before he could respond, and she felt nothing. No anger. No regret. Just a quiet certainty that she had closed a door that needed closing. The twins were 8 months old when Sarah met Jessica Reyes. Jessica was a social worker who had read the article and reached out, not to investigate, but to offer help. She ran a nonprofit that supported single mothers transitioning out of homelessness, and she wanted to feature Sarah's story in their fundraising materials. They met at a coffee shop, and Sarah found herself telling the truth for the first time, to not the part about the money, but everything else. The eviction, the streets, the fear, the desperation. The moment at the auction when she had nothing and bid anyway. Jessica listened with an intensity that made Sarah feel heard, truly heard, for the first time in longer than she could remember. When Sarah finished, Jessica reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "What you did is extraordinary," Jessica said. "You didn't just survive. You built something. And I think your story could help other women see that it's possible." "It's not," Sarah said quietly. "I got lucky. If that building had sold for what it was worth, I'd still be on the street. But you were there. You showed up. You bid. That's not luck. That's courage." Over the next few weeks, Jessica visited the prison several times, bringing other social workers, showing them what Sarah had done. They talked about using the building for more than just Sarah's home. The prison was huge, most of it still empty. What if they could turn portions of it into transitional housing? Short-term apartments for mothers coming out of shelters, giving them a place to stabilize before finding permanent housing. Sarah had been thinking about it too. The building had 64 cells in the old cell blocks, most of them large enough to be converted into studio apartments. With work, they could create safe, affordable housing for dozens of families, but it would cost money. A lot of money. Sarah thought about the bonds she still hadn't cashed, about the gold coins hidden in John's safe. She thought about the choice before her. She could keep it all, secure her own future, and make sure she and the twins never wanted for anything. Or she could use it to help others, to turn her impossible luck into something that served more than just herself. She met with John late one night in his shop, the twins asleep in the truck outside where she could see them through the window. She told him about Jessica's proposal. John listened, then shook his head. "That's a lot of money, Sarah. Money you might need." "I know. But I've got more than I ever dreamed, more than I can spend. What am I supposed to do? Just keep it? Let it sit while people suffer? Most people would, yeah. I'm not most people." She looked at him. "You taught me that. You helped me when you didn't have to, because someone helped you. This is the same thing, passing it forward." John was quiet for a long time. Then he smiled, slow and sad. "Bill would have liked you. He'd say you get it, that the money doesn't matter if you die with it unused." "So you'll help me? Help us turn this place into something bigger?" He nodded. "Yeah, I'll help. But we do it smart. We set up a proper nonprofit. We get grants to supplement what you're putting in. We make it sustainable, so it outlives you, outlives me. Deal? Deal. It took another 6 months to make it happen. They formed the Riverside Recovery Center, a nonprofit dedicated to providing transitional housing and support services for homeless single mothers. Sarah put $100,000 into the organization as seed funding, claiming it came from a combination of savings and private donations. With that capital and a compelling mission, they qualified for city and state grants that matched what Sarah provided. No, they hired contractors, legitimate ones this time, with proper insurance and credentials. They renovated 20 of the old cells in the West Wing, turning them into small but comfortable studio apartments, each with a kitchenette and bathroom. They built a common area with donated furniture, a playroom for children, a computer lab where mothers could search for jobs and build resumes. Jessica helped them navigate the nonprofit regulations, the licensing requirements, the inspections and certifications needed to operate legally. It was exhausting work, mountains of paperwork and bureaucracy, but Sarah pushed through it with the same stubborn determination that had gotten her this far. The Riverside Recovery Center opened on a gray November morning, exactly 1 year after Sarah had bought the building. A small crowd gathered for the ribbon cutting. Jessica was there, along with other social workers and nonprofit directors. John and his crew, who had done most of the renovation work. The mayor showed up, seizing a photo opportunity. Even Linda Vaughn came, her expression carefully neutral, offering measured praise that suggested she had decided it was better to be on the right side of a successful story than to be remembered as the person who tried to stop it. Sarah stood in front of the building she had bought for $1, holding Emma on one hip and Ethan on the other, and cut the ribbon. Cameras flashed. People applauded. And for a moment, she closed her eyes and thought about the woman she had been a year ago, shivering in the rain, hungry and desperate and afraid. That woman felt like a stranger now, but Sarah knew she would never forget her. Never forget what it felt like to have nothing. Because that memory was what would keep her fighting for the women who came through the center's doors, looking for the same thing she had found. A second chance. The first family moved in 2 days later. A woman named Carmen with a 3-year-old son, escaping domestic violence, nowhere else to go. Sarah showed her the studio apartment, watched Carmen's face as she saw the clean bed, the small kitchen, the toys in the playroom. Carmen cried. "This is mine? Really mine?" "For up to 6 months," Sarah explained, "while you get on your feet. Find a job, save money, figure out what's next. We've got counselors who can help, childcare assistance, job training if you need it, whatever it takes." Carmen set her son down and turned to Sarah. "Oh, why are you doing this?" Sarah thought about the money hidden in the Warden's safe, about John's help and Jessica's vision, and all the impossible pieces that had come together, about how life sometimes gave you exactly what you needed, even if it came in the strangest ways. "Because someone helped me," she said, "and this is how I help someone else." Over the next months, the center filled. Women arrived broken and left stronger. Children who had known only instability found routines, safety, friends. Sarah watched them, these families passing through, and felt something she had never expected to feel. Pride. Not in herself exactly, but in what they had built. In what was possible when you refused to accept that nothing could change. She cashed the last of the bonds on a Tuesday afternoon, depositing the check into the center's account. The gold coins she sold over the course of a year to various collectors and dealers, never more than a few at a time, always for cash that she funneled into the nonprofit. By the time she was done, she had put over $200,000 into the Riverside Recovery Center, keeping only enough for herself to live modestly and save for the twins' future. The money that had been stolen, that had been hidden in a safe for 15 years, was now feeding children and housing families and creating futures where none had existed before. Sarah didn't know if that absolved its origins, but she knew it was better than leaving it hidden, better than letting it rot unused while people suffered. Emma and Ethan celebrated their second birthday in the center's common room, surrounded by other children from the housing program, and by staff who had become family, by John and Jessica and Grace the accountant, and all the people who had helped turn impossible into real. Sarah watched her children blow out candles on a cake she had baked herself, in a kitchen that was hers, in a building that had become home not just to her, but to dozens of others. She thought about the rain and the cold and the nights she had prayed for anything, any small piece of hope. She had found more than hope. She had found purpose. She had found proof that endings could become beginnings, that rock bottom could be foundation instead of grave. Later that night, after the party ended and the twins were asleep in their room, Sarah stood at the window of her apartment, looking out over the city lights. The prison, the center, was quiet now, but it hummed with life in a way it never had when it held prisoners. Her phone buzzed. A text from Jessica. "Just heard from the state. We got approved for the grant. Another $150,000 for expansion. Sarah, we can add another 20 units. We can help so many more families." Sarah smiled, typing back. "Let's do it." She set the phone down and returned to the window. Somewhere in this city, she knew there was another woman like she had been, desperate, afraid, clinging to babies, and wondering if the next day would be the day everything finally broke beyond repair. Sarah couldn't save everyone, but she could save some. She could offer what had been offered to her, a chance, a choice, a door that opened instead of closing. The money was gone now, transformed into walls and beds and futures, but it had never really been about the money, Sarah realized. It had been about what you did with the impossible when it fell into your hands, whether you hoarded it or shared it, whether you let it change only yourself or let it change the world around you. She had chosen change, and in choosing it, she had found something more valuable than any amount of gold or cash or bonds. She had found herself, not the woman Marcus left, not the woman who slept under bridges, but someone new. Someone who had been forged in desperation and tempered by impossible luck, and emerged stronger than she had ever imagined she could be. Sarah Mitchell, who bought a prison for $1 and found a fortune in its walls, who could have kept it all and instead gave it away, who turned ruins into refuge and suffering into hope. The twins stirred in their room, and Sarah went to them, checking blankets, kissing foreheads, whispering promises she knew she could keep. "We're safe. We're home. We're never going back." And in the darkness of the old prison that was now a home, in the silence that held sleeping children and dreaming futures, Sarah understood that some treasures could never be locked in a safe. Some treasures only existed when you gave them away. The story had started with nothing. It had become everything, and it was only just beginning. 5 years later, the Riverside Recovery Center had housed over 300 families. 80% of the women who passed through found stable housing and employment within a year of leaving. The center had expanded to include job training programs, early childhood education, and partnerships with local colleges offering scholarships to former residents. Sarah remained the director, though she had hired staff to handle day-to-day operations. Emma and Ethan attended the preschool on site, growing up among children who understood that home was something you built, not something you were guaranteed. John still came by weekly, bringing supplies, fixing things that broke, telling stories that made the children laugh. He never spoke of the money, of where it had come from, or how it had transformed. That secret remained buried, locked away as securely as it had been in the warden's safe. No one ever came looking for the money. No investigation surfaced. The warden who had hidden it died in prison himself, convicted of corruption in a different facility, never revealing what he had left behind. The money had been forgotten by everyone except the 2 people who had found it, and the hundreds it had helped. Sometimes, on late at night, Sarah would think about that safe, about the impossible sequence of events that had led her to it. The storm, the auction, John's help, the hidden office, the notebook with the combination. Any one of those pieces missing, and she would still be on the street. Or worse. She had stopped believing in coincidence. Some things were just meant to happen. Some doors were meant to open. Some people were meant to find what others had hidden. The warden had stolen that money, intending to hide it forever, to use it for himself. Instead, it had been found by someone who needed it desperately and used it generously. There was a kind of justice in that, Sarah thought. Not the justice of courts and laws, but the deeper kind. The kind that said good could come from bad, that light could be born from darkness. As Emma and Ethan grew older, Sarah would tell them stories. Not the true story. That would remain her secret, hers and John's. But a story nonetheless. About a woman who had nothing and built everything. About a building that had held prisoners and became a sanctuary. About how sometimes the worst moments of your life were preparing you for the best. And when her children asked, as children always do, "But how did you do it, Mama? How did you build all this?" Sarah would smile and tell them the truth that mattered. By not giving up. By taking the chances that came, even when they seemed impossible. By remembering that we're all stronger than we think we are. And by helping others when we can, because that's how we give meaning to what we've been given. It was a good answer, a true answer. Even if it wasn't the complete answer, the money had changed everything. But it was what Sarah chose to do with it that transformed a miracle into a legacy. And on the wall of the center's entrance, in a simple frame, hung a photograph. Sarah on the day of the auction, standing in the rain with the twins in their stroller in front of the chain-link fence. Behind her, the abandoned prison loomed dark and foreboding. But on her face, visible even through the exhaustion and despair, was something else. Determination. The stubborn refusal to surrender that had brought her this far and would carry her further still. Below the photograph, a plaque read, "From $1 to one dream. This is what's possible when you believe." Visitors would stop and read it, and some would cry, because they understood. They had been there too, at the bottom, looking up. And the photograph was proof that the bottom wasn't the end. No, it was just the beginning of climbing. 7 years after Sarah bought the prison, on a morning bright with spring sunshine, a black sedan pulled up to the Riverside Recovery Center's gate. 2 people emerged, a man and a woman, both wearing conservative suits and carrying briefcases. Sarah watched them from her office window, her stomach tightening with the instinct that had kept her alive during her months on the street. Authority had arrived. She met them at the entrance, Emma and Ethan playing in the courtyard with other children, their laughter a soundtrack to her anxiety. "Sarah Mitchell?" the woman asked. She was young, maybe 30, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "That's me. I'm Agent Lisa Chen with the Treasury Department. This is Agent Marcus Holbrook. We'd like to ask you some questions about the history of this property." Sarah's heart hammered, but she kept her expression neutral. "Of course. Come to my office." They sat across from her desk, the same desk she had salvaged from the administrative wing and refinished herself. Agent Chen pulled out a tablet, while Holbrook produced a worn file folder. "We're conducting an investigation into corruption at several California correctional facilities from 2005 to 2010, Chen began. "Riverside is one of them. We understand you purchased this building at auction in 2016? "That's correct, for $1. And you've since invested significant capital into renovating it and establishing this nonprofit. Yes, through a combination of personal funds, grants, and donations. Holbrook leaned forward. Ms. Mitchell, according to our financial analysis, you've put approximately $200,000 into this center over the past 7 years. Yet prior to purchasing this building, you were unemployed and homeless. Where did that money come from? Sarah had rehearsed this answer 1,000 times in her mind. I received a settlement from my former employer, workplace injury. The details are confidential under the settlement agreement. We'll need documentation of that settlement. The agreement included a non-disclosure clause. My attorney has the records, but I'm legally prohibited from discussing the specifics. Chen and Holbrook exchanged glances. Who's your attorney? Sarah had anticipated this too. 6 months ago, she had hired a lawyer, a small practice attorney named David Ling, who specialized in employment law. She had paid him to draft settlement paperwork that was technically legitimate, a legal fiction that covered the truth. It had cost her $5,000, but it was insurance she had known she would eventually need. David Ling in Bakersfield. I can give you his contact information. Chen made a note. We'll follow up with him. In the meantime, we'd like permission to search the property. For what? We have reason to believe that certain administrators at Riverside Correctional may have hidden assets on the premises before the facility closed. Embezzled funds, specifically. Sarah's blood ran cold, but she forced herself to remain calm. Hidden where? The building has been completely renovated. If there was anything hidden, we would have found it by now. Nevertheless, we'd like to conduct a thorough search. With your permission. Sarah knew she couldn't refuse without raising suspicion. Of course. But I'll need to ensure the safety and privacy of our residents. We have 12 families currently living here, including children. Whatever you do, it needs to be discreet and non-disruptive. Chen nodded. We understand. We'll bring in a team tomorrow morning. Early. Before most people are awake. It shouldn't take more than a few hours. After they left, Sarah immediately called John. He arrived 20 minutes later, his face grave as she explained the situation. They're looking for the money, she said, her voice shaking. What if they find something? What if there's some trace I missed? John was quiet, thinking. The safe is empty. You moved everything out 7 years ago. The basement office has been renovated. There's nothing physical left to find. But what if they have records? Serial numbers from the bonds I cashed? Transaction records? The bonds were cashed slowly over 2 years at different banks, always under the reporting threshold. Same with the gold coins, sold to private collectors. There's no paper trail connecting you to stolen funds. And even if they suspect, suspicion isn't proof. Your lawyer has paperwork showing a legitimate settlement. It's airtight. The worst they can do is question you harder. But you don't have to answer. You have a Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. Sarah pressed her hands to her face. I knew this would happen. I knew eventually someone would come asking. And you prepared for it. You did everything right. You created a legal fiction that's solid enough to withstand scrutiny. Now, you just have to hold your nerve. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, listening to the twins breathe in the next room, imagining federal agents tearing apart the building she had fought so hard to save, imagining handcuffs, prison, her children taken into foster care. But when morning came, she dressed carefully, put on her professional face, and met the agents at 6 a.m. with coffee and a calm demeanor she didn't feel. The search team was thorough but respectful. They swept the basement with ground-penetrating radar, looking for hidden chambers. They checked the walls for concealed safes. They brought in dogs trained to detect currency. For 6 hours, Sarah watched them search every corner of the building while trying to keep residents calm and children occupied. By noon, they found nothing. The money was long gone, transformed into walls and windows, into beds and education, into futures that had nothing to do with the warden who had stolen it. Agent Chen approached Sarah in her office, her expression unreadable. We didn't find any hidden assets, which means either they never existed or they were removed long ago. Or they never existed, Sarah said. Maybe. Chen handed her a card. If you remember anything, or if you find anything unusual during future renovations, contact me immediately. This investigation is ongoing. After they left, Sarah sat alone in her office for an hour, shaking with relief and residual fear. John found her there, tears streaming down her face. It's over, she whispered. They're gone. For now, John said gently. But Sarah, you need to understand. There will always be questions. People will always wonder how a homeless woman turned a condemned building into this. You'll need to make peace with that. How do you make peace with living a lie? John sat down across from her, his weathered face kind. By looking at what the lie protected. You didn't keep that money for yourself. You used it to help people who had nothing, just like you had nothing. That's not theft. That's redistribution. That's justice in a world that doesn't always provide it legally. Sarah wanted to believe him. Most days she did. But there were nights when she still woke in a cold sweat, imagining different outcomes, different choices, different consequences. 3 months after the federal agent's visit, John had a heart attack. Sarah got the call at 2 in the morning and drove to the hospital with Emma and Ethan still in their pajamas, arriving to find him already gone. He had died quickly, the doctors said. No pain. A mercy. At his funeral, Sarah stood beside the casket and spoke to the small gathering of contractors and workers who had known him. She told them about the first day she met him, about how he had paid her registration fee for reasons she still didn't fully understand, about how he had taught her to use a hammer and a drill, about how he had never asked for repayment, only that she helped someone else the way he had helped her. What she didn't say was that John had saved her life, not metaphorically, literally. Without him, she would have disappeared into the anonymity of homelessness, another statistic, like another woman lost to a system that didn't care. He had given her more than construction skills. He had given her belief in herself, in her right to survive, in her capacity to build something meaningful from ruins. In his will, John left her his tools. Every hammer, every drill, every saw he had owned. His truck, old and battered, but still running. And a letter. Sarah read it alone in her apartment while the twins slept. John's handwriting was shaky but clear. Sarah, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Don't waste tears on an old man who lived longer than he deserved. Instead, remember what I taught you. Buildings can be fixed. Lives can be rebuilt. Nothing is so broken that it can't be made into something new. You asked me once why I helped you. I told you about Bill, about the man who saved me. That was true. But there's more. And you reminded me of my daughter, not in looks, but in spirit. That stubborn refusal to quit even when quitting would be easier. She had that too. I couldn't save her. The fire took her before I could reach her. But I could save you. And through you, I could save others. That's what this life is about, Sarah. Saving who you can, helping where you're able, passing forward what was given to you. The money you found wasn't an accident. Buildings like that get searched before auction. Someone knew it was there and said nothing. Maybe they thought no one would be brave enough or desperate enough to buy a condemned prison. Maybe they thought the money would stay hidden forever. But you found it. And what you did with it matters more than where it came from. Don't let anyone tell you different. Keep building. Keep helping. Keep fighting for the people no one else fights for. That's your purpose now. That's your gift. And Sarah? Thank you. For letting an old man feel useful again. For giving me a reason to wake up every morning. For showing me that maybe all the pain had a point after all. Take care of those babies. They're lucky to have you. John. Sarah folded the letter carefully and tucked it into the frame with the photograph that hung in the center's entrance. John deserved to be part of the story. He had been the bridge between her desperation and her transformation. Without him, there was no center, no homes, no hope. Emma, now 7, found her crying later that day. "Mama, why are you sad?" Sarah pulled her daughter close. "Because someone very important died. A friend who helped us when we had nothing." "Mr. John?" "Yes, I'm sweetheart." Emma was quiet for a moment, then said, "He taught me how to hammer. He said I was strong." "You are strong? Are you going to keep helping people, like he helped us?" Sarah kissed the top of her daughter's head. "Yes, always." The years continued to roll forward. Emma and Ethan grew. The center expanded, adding educational programs and mental health services. Sarah hired a former resident, a woman named Patricia, who had come through the program 5 years earlier and now held a social work degree, to serve as assistant director. On quiet days, Sarah would walk through the building, touching walls she had built, looking at photographs of families who had passed through and moved on to stable lives. The prison that had once held people captive now set them free. Sometimes she thought about the warden, about what kind of man steals from the people he's supposed to serve, about whether he ever felt remorse, about whether, if he could see what his hidden fortune had become, he would feel vindicated or enraged. She decided it didn't matter. The money had its own life now, separate from its origins. It had become something pure through the alchemy of desperation and generosity. When Emma was 10, she asked the question Sarah had been dreading. "Mama, how did you really get the money to build all this?" They were sitting in the courtyard, watching Ethan play soccer with other children. Sarah had rehearsed this conversation in her mind for years, but now that it was happening, the words felt stuck. "What do you mean?" she stalled. "The other kids say you found treasure, but that's just a story, right?" Sarah looked at her daughter, at her intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She thought about lying, about maintaining the fiction. But Emma deserved better than that. "Sometimes," Sarah said carefully, "life gives you things you weren't expecting, opportunities that seem impossible, and you have to decide what to do with them. I got lucky once, in a way I'll never fully be able to explain, and I chose to use that luck to help other people. That's the truth that matters." Emma considered this. "So, you did find something?" "I found a chance, and I took it. And I'll never regret that, because look what it became." She gestured at the building, at the children playing, at the mothers visible through windows preparing dinner in kitchens that were theirs, at least for a while. "Is that enough of an answer?" Sarah asked. Emma nodded slowly. "I think so. Can I help? When I'm older? Of course. This place will need someone to run it when I can't anymore. Then I'll do it. Me and Ethan. We'll keep it going." Sarah felt her throat tighten. This was legacy. Not money or buildings or programs, but this. Children who understood that their privilege came with responsibility. Children who had seen their mother build something from nothing and wanted to continue that work. The story that had started with $1 and a desperate prayer had become something she could never have imagined. It had become proof that rock bottom could be foundation, that the worst moment of your life could be the beginning of your best work, that sometimes, just sometimes, the universe bent in unexpected ways, and if you were brave enough to reach out when it did, you could catch something extraordinary. Sarah Mitchell, who had been homeless and hopeless, who had bought a prison for $1 and found a fortune in its walls, who had chosen to give away what she could have kept, looked at her daughter and smiled. "Yes," she said. "We'll keep it going, for as long as people need it. That's a promise." And in the courtyard of the old prison that had become a sanctuary, with the sound of children's laughter echoing off concrete walls that once held only suffering, that promise felt like the most sacred thing Sarah had ever spoken. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.